The adaptation of The Last of Us game has finally premiered all of its episodes on HBO Max, and today we're going to take a deep analysis to figure out whether or not this show is actually scary, and if it is scary, how scary is it? In order for this show to pass off on being a scary show or not, it would have to succeed in all 4 of these brackets that I created. And the 4 brackets are: how much blood is in here, how many kills are in each episode, how violent does the show get, and how many jump scares are in each of the episodes. So let's go ahead and get started talking about the first bracket. And the first bracket that we're going to be talking about is how bloody is the show. And in order for this bracket to be successful, it needs to pass these 3 subjects. We need to see the amount of blood that's in here, the amount of gore that's in here, and how much torture are these characters having throughout the entire show. There's a satisfying enough amount of blood utilized across the entirety of the show. They don't overuse it, they don't limit it, they use just the right amount when deaths, wounds, or general attacks happen in a zombie apocalypse. Plenty of people getting stabbed, shot, punched, or beat up. Sometimes they'll show pools of blood when somebody just frankly dies from being shot. It's again the exact amount that should be used and what you can expect from a show that has this kind of atmosphere and tone. For the gore, people get decapitated, having limbs being torn apart, some would get sliced up, but at times they're pretty rare to see on the show. They're clearly not going to have these moments off screen, but when they do show the impact of these people being abused and attacked, it's not as exploitive as you think it can be, considering it's the zombie apocalypse. It's not like Hellraiser, where clearly people are being delimbed or tons of bodies shown getting intestines thrown out of them, but it still shows some people getting maimed and harmed physically, and it's not pretty. And finally, for the last bracket, there are absolutely tons of torture scenes in here, whether it's physically or mentally. For a show that's about the zombie apocalypse, their loved ones getting transformed into something that nobody wants, and there's honestly no choice of what they can do when they end up the way they are. Characters have to make decisions they don't want to make, and it forces them in places where they lose more of who they are. Those who try their best to not give up on their inner humanity do what they can to give others hope, but when the plague becomes too strong and overruns any means of hope, things only get worse and hardly get any better. Sometimes it's so tough they can't really live with what they've done or what they have experienced. Even our good guys do some painful things that make us as the audience scared of them. Episode 8 is a prime example of that in 2 specific scenes. I won't say what they are for those who do not know the game and haven't watched the show, but in those 2 scenes, you'll see some torture our characters enforce onto others. So for the blood section, I'm definitely giving it a 5 out of 5. For the gore, it's a 3 out of 5. And for the torture, it will definitely be a 5 out of 5. And with all 3 of these sections being calculated, it brings the entire blood section to a 13 out of 15. The second one that we'll be looking at are the amount of kills. And what counts for these deaths to be successful is to see if the MPA rating is fine for what it is, if it's actually fine for its rated R material rating, or if it's alright if it were PG-13 light type of show. We need to see how grotesque these deaths are, and if there are any moments where they're endured in traps or less room for these characters to escape. So I did the best that I could to calculate how many kills I did see throughout the entire show, and the most that I got out of it was a total of 38 kills. And it's at least when you see them being actively killed. There's probably more than that, but this is mostly the best I could do to count how many there are. Now, as for the MPA rating, making the show TVMA makes the atmosphere and the attitude that the show presents, gives itself more grittiness, and you can understand the sheer reality of our character situation is very dire and hardcore and intense. They don't hold back on how anybody can flaunt swear words, how ruthlessly obscure our characters have been put through, and why they have a right to move away from a purity attitude in order to strive through the hard tribulations they're needed to overcome. Having the show being PG-13 wouldn't have worked at all. The grotesque value in the show is very satisfying also. The show has presented a variety of undescribably ruthless deaths, whether it's people getting attacked and killed, or if it's someone who has already died and their body begins to decompose, and they're nothing but waste and are a part of the fungi disease, and they are no longer alive. If I were to be honest, some of the death scenes could have been a little more grotesque, mostly because there are advanced zombies inside of the universe that act deadlier than other forms of zombies, and when you see that some of those advanced zombies make it look like that they've only scratched them a little bit and they're bleeding out, I would have preferred them to be more cut out and have just a little bit more slaughtering to their corpses in order to show the sheer terror and shock that those monsters can actually do to a person. I'm not saying that we need to go a lot more gory than it was, but just a little bit more grotesque just to edge it out a little bit to the point where the grotesque value works a lot better. Now, finally, when talking about the traps, it is really hard to find rooms for these characters to escape, and the last resort for them to do is to kill whatever is in their way is pretty harsh. You can see a lot of moments where these characters are put in situations where they don't have a lot of options, and sometimes they have to fall into those traps, but a good bit of the times they are able to escape those traps because they're in a world where it's every person for themselves, and our main characters have managed to get through most of the terrors they're able to get out. So I would have to deduct some points for that. It's pretty intense when you see the situations they're in, but still, our main characters have always managed to escape. So for the MPA rating, I'm giving it a 5 out of 5. The grotesque value, I gotta knock it just a tiny bit and give it a 4.5 out of 5. And for the traps, I'm gonna give that section a 4 out of 5. And all three of those brackets give the kill section a 13.5 out of 15. The next bracket we're looking at is the amount of violence in here. And in order for this bracket to be successful, we need to see if any of the personalities from our characters are really violent. Do we have any antagonists or villains that are highly ambitious to not stop doing what it is that they're doing and continue pursuing their actions? And lastly, how brutal can the show get? So, for the personality, there are of course a ton of people who are against us, and some can come from justifiable reasons, but other times they come from something darker. There are those who tend to see pain as a way for justice being served from their enemies, antagonists who manage to eat other people and see it as a good thing for survival, and it comes off as very sinister, people in power who should have the responsibility to help others, yet abuse it to either gain something for selfish benefits, or tend to use them because they want the easier way, which is just as harsh, to see how humanity can strive to survive. Which means they'll kill innocent people if they have to, just so they don't create any more massive amounts of infected on the planet. So it clearly shows that everybody contains a really harsh background and nobody would ever seem to be safe. I mean, our main characters do come across people who have an ambition to seek mostly vengeance on those who happen to have crushed their lives personally. In other terms though, it's mostly our protagonists that tend to fight through a ton of tragedies in order to get what they want. When understanding the kind of story it's telling, we have to remind ourselves that even though the whole world is relying on just ourselves and barely on others, everyone would have to be declared as the bad guy if you look at each individual's perspective. Which is why whenever someone is getting in the way of our main characters, the protagonists have a huge drive to fight their way in front of anybody, no matter how much others would see us as the bad guy. This world endures that kind of tragedy, and what's worse is that in this world, our inner morality is on the brink. There are those who lose it, and those who do whatever it takes to save it. Either way, it can be contorted in a good way or terrible way for either of those options, because those standards can be manipulative or nurtured. There are those who snap and try to destroy others by being in power, or because they've been degraded and seek out to reap vengeance on their enemies. So I would say that this show absolutely gets every single episode really violent, and all three of these sections deserve a 5 out of 5, which means that the violence section is a perfect 15 out of 15. And finally, we're going to be looking to the one that you've probably been anticipating for the most, the jump scares. And after this bracket, we're going to be calculating all the points that we've gotten for all 4 of these brackets, and then give out a percentage to see how scary this show actually is. Oh, and by the way, don't forget to hit like, click that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell if you want to see more videos like this in the near future. We'll be looking in each and every single episode how many jump scares there are, whether or not they linger with traumatization, or if they're just a quick shocking moment where they want to cause you some tension for just a minute, or if there's just any straight up fake outs. So the jump scares. I would have to say that this is the section that feels the most complicated. They're nothing terrible, and sometimes they can be used good enough, but at other times I'm a little confused on whether or not the actual jump scares they try to do are actual jump scares. The setup is there, and the buildup looks like it's going to be tense, but once the moment you're supposed to be surprised happens, it ends up feeling like a, yeah, I saw that coming more than a, whoa, what the heck moment. I think the reason why some of them don't get me that much is maybe because I had played the game before and I knew what I could expect in certain moments, but even if you didn't play the game, if you're familiar with this kind of genre, you wouldn't be surprised still on what moments tend to happen when they are surprising, and not all the moments give you an intense feeling. It's weird because jump scares have a way of getting people easily, especially in a zombie apocalypse genre, but if the routine that's usually played in that genre becomes very familiar to the point where it doesn't faze you as much, then it doesn't become that surprising. There are a couple of moments, even though I did play the game, they managed to get me tense only because of the correct timing of the surprise and the aftermath of what happens after the scare, but for most of them, they don't usually hold up as well. So for the jump scare section, I'm gonna have to give this one a 2.5 out of 5. HBO Max's The Last of Us pulls off a very faithful adaptation of the game by making the story just as tragic and the atmosphere filled with a lot of grittiness. There's plenty of twisted material to admire if you understand the reality of our character's situation and how much humanity has been lost during its time. If you're looking for a ghostly, ghouling kind of horror film that's filled with terrifying monsters, I would say you get it in a different sense, but not in a way where it feels like you're getting a ghost story, and it shouldn't be like that. So with all the calculations that we gathered in from all 4 brackets, The Last of Us comes out being at least 88% scary. If you look at the tragedy of the story and how detrimental everything is, you can definitely see how terrifying everything in the show is. So what did you guys think of HBO Max's Last of Us show? Did you like this show? Did you not like this show? Did you thought the show was scary? Did you not think that this show was scary at all? Did you agree with this rating system, or do you think that this system needs to be updated a little bit? Put your thoughts down in the comment section below, and let's have a conversation about it. And like this video if you agree with what I say, or dislike this video if you disagree with what I say. I don't mind the dislikes. So that is it I have for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be sure to see you in the next video.